Everyone, my name is Christina. I'm from Lighthouse Bookshop. Welcome to this event, this Book Fringe event. I'm just going to read some intro. As an introduction, I'll read some bios for our lovely speakers. Also to remind you, this is a half-hour event, and then there'll be 15 minutes for any signings, any questions, anything that you might want to ask or contribute to the conversation. Also, there's a lot of garden noises, so feel free to move around during the event to be comfortable so that you can enjoy the event to its fullest. But to introduce our speakers, Joel White is a writer and researcher based in Glasgow. He's with groups in the city that organise around mutual aid, migrant solidarity, prison abolition and anti-racism. His writing has appeared in The Guardian, Wire, Tribune and the LRB blog. He co-runs the record label Glark. Is that how you say it? Nice, Clark, yes. Okay, Laura C. Forster is a lecturer in modern history at the University of York. Her research is concerned with intimacy, radical ideas, and political activism in the long 19th century. Laura has written for Tribune, Roar, Dope, and Novara Media. She lives in Newcastle and is part of Food and Solidarity. I will now hand it over to our speakers. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks so much. Yeah, Laura lives in Leith now. You have to update the bio. Shout out to Leith. I'm sure none of you have travelled from Leith. So nice to be here. Thanks, in this little oasis of calm and books. Thank you to Lighthouse Legends. I used to live here when it first opened, coming in, and I was being so excited. It's nice to just have a lunch time, kind of short, snappy event. But I am going to try and enunciate and talk slow and less Bradford than I have been, because I've had that feedback a lot. I'm Joel. Oh, the mic's on. Oh yeah, no it is.
Now? Only when I hold it like this. We can just swap. Yeah, you go. I'm Laura. Hello. Thanks for coming. You're going to start anyway, are you? So then.
Great. So we did a little book tour. This book came out on the 20th of June, and we didn't manage to get to Edinburgh, so it's really nice to be here now. And I guess basically we're just going to do a little bit of reading from the very beginning, which is the introduction. Before I do that, I'll just say the book covers a lot of ground, and I think some would say maybe too much ground. But the bits we're going to read from initially, at least, are very kind of romantic and pro-friendship. But there's quite a lot of bits that we could talk about later that are also quite critical of how friendship then operates in the world we live in today. So depending on what you're interested to talk about, there's chapters on family abolition and how that relates to friendship. There's one on work and what it means to try and organise and think about friendship in work. There's one about kind of movement and making friends across different kinds of borders and how that works, and doing things like this, being in spaces together with people and sharing ideas. Laura is a historian of the 19th century, so we kind of think in that chapter about how the lecture tours that lots of early anarchists and socialists did, where they went around often just in a cart with caravan, with bits of material and kind of pamphlets, and did talks in different places, were very important to the building of the left-wing movement we know today, but also not just the kind of ideas, but the physical movement and being in different places and meeting people and sleeping on their floors. We have a chapter about intergenerational friendship. And then we have one at the end about solidarity, and one about kind of can we scale up friendship to be something that we think about in terms of internationalist organising, and then we have one about bad friends, which looks particularly at the way that the state has policed friendship through the kind of horrendous undercover policing operations that have been going on for the last 5 decades at least, and a lot longer in other ways. So yeah, that's just to give you a little flavour of what we do through the book. But I'll start in Glasgow, where I live, with a friend, Yvonne. This section is called Yvonne and Jean. We'll meet Jean in a minute. But I've said this before, I wouldn't have done this, but I have to talk in third person, which is obviously very pretentious, so apologies. I'm Joel. And Joel is sitting in a cafe in Glasgow with an old friend, Yvonne. So Yvonne is Yvonne Blake. Some of you might know. She's an incredible organiser who runs a group called Migrants Organising for Rights and Empowerment in Glasgow. Look her up, support their work. So Joel and Ron met years back through the Unity Centre, a drop-in space for people in the asylum and immigration system in Glasgow. Clear memories. The smell of the instant coffee, the sound of the printer and the old office chair squeaking, the constant hubbub of offering advice, catching up. Today, over tea and bowls of soup, the two of them are doing an interview. Joel asks, "What does friendship mean? Is it a useful thing to focus on?" A moment and takes a sip of tea. You said the sound better. The breathing's really loud. I'm sorry about my breathing. Just imagine it's a gentle breeze. Breathe off. Okay. So this is Yvonne. You know, in Yarswood, an immigration detention centre near London, I didn't know about Unity. But without fail, twice a week I'd get a call from them. They would ask, "How am I? How are things?" They listened to what I had to say. For me, friendship means strength in the struggle, but vicariously, vicarious support. If you're inside and two people get deported, nobody has any strength. But if we are outside, we are here. We are caring. You get, I don't know what to call it, like vicarious strength. Does that make sense? There are times when you're just lying there and you're lost, and that support encourages you, and you encourage other people, and there is a domino effect. Because, you know, sometimes we're coming from countries with legacies of colonialism, capitalism, everything, that mean we can't share things, can't be ourselves. And at Unity, when these people see my file, or see my monthly report or whatever, they are seeing things about me that even my own family don't know. But nobody judges nobody. Friendship is being there for me, for people, not judging, not, what's the word? Taking away their autonomy? Is de-autonomizing a word? She laughs loudly before quickly turning back to a tone of serious reflection. It is two people walking together on this journey. If I laugh, you laugh. If I sit and rest, you sit and rest. If I'm sad, we are sad together. It's also about not forgetting the importance of hanging out at people's houses, talking rubbish. To be outside of all that, we chat, we laugh. It has to be natural. You have to have a love for humanity as opposed to it becoming a cause. This person has become part of you. So for Yvonne, each definition of friendship necessitates another one. To reframe her words is to somehow reduce the power of them. But in them we find friendship described as acts of listening and support, and unjudgmental and intimate knowledge that contrasts with the familial. A love of humanity, in her words, that doesn't reduce people to an issue or cause. Hanging out, shared autonomy, shared personhood. Beyond the insight of each point she presents, Yvonne's words also underline friendship shifting meaning. One short conversation on the topic produces a beguiling set of definitions, explanations, and feelings. Some books about friendship would start with a similar education. Friendship is multifaceted, hard to define, contextual. Whilst agreeing broadly with this invocation of breadth, in this book, we are interested in writing about friendship in more ways. Reading Yvonne's spiral of definitions not simply as an admittance of friendship's slippery ephemeralness. Jesus, couldn't read that out loud when we wrote it. But as an attempt to gain some purchase. Friends in Common, our book, has its roots in conversations like this one with Yvonne, trying to figure out with friends, in acts of friendship, the links between political struggle and interpersonal belonging, and what historical resonances might help us to do so. We want, like Yvonne, to think of friendship as struggle, and friendship through struggle. Friendship as both a political act in itself, a commitment to forming intimacies despite the individualising and apathy-inducing capitalist machine, and as a key sustaining force within political struggles of various kinds. We want to think about building vicarious strength, a beautiful phrase, across difference, within legacies of colonialism, capitalism, everything. We want to treat friendship as foundational to revolutionary projects, not peripheral to the real intellectual meat of political ideas. We want to think about how friendship constitutes ideas in action across different historical junctures. We want to understand the life of ideas. To do this, we need to foreground friendship. In doing so, we ended up thinking carefully about friendship's limits, what it means to build collective struggle against a capitalist system that works to co-opt, contain, and destroy relational bonds that threaten it. Different sites can offer different ways into this discussion. For Laura, it was reading a John Marsden book about pen pals, Letters from Inside, 1991, as a young teenager. In the book, one of the friends, Tracy, is encouraged in a juvenile detention centre, and the other, Mandy, struggles with abuse at home. The novel unfolds as a series of letters that oscillate between the quotidian, school, boys, pets, and earnest attempts to navigate truth and trust and ethical tribulations. For Laura, the book prompted early reflection on the letter as a deliberative form of friendship, and on ideas of friendship across difference, friendship as solidarity. So you'll see in a minute we use letters a lot in the book, and we can talk about that if you want. Years later, when living in the US as a student, these themes led Laura to the Black and Pink Prison Pen Pal group, and to new forms of friendship found there. For me, like Yvonne, it was a Unity Centre. Opened in 2006 in Glasgow, Unity was initially focused on supporting people required to regularly sign as asylum seekers at the Home Office Reporting Centre around the corner. But it quickly became a general hub for informal immigration casework, activism and socialising. At my first Unity volunteer training session in 2016, I was immediately struck by the focus on terminology. We use the word friend here, said one of the collective members running the session. Not client or service user, not asylum seeker or refugee, we tried to say friend. Unity made friendship a key part of its ethos and operational logic, threading together lineages of anti-racism, no borders, queerness and feminism that we will unpack through the book. Later, when we started to think and write about why friendship was appearing in this way, the same collective member from Unity sent me an email about revolution and friendship, thanks to Elle. In it, they included a PDF scan of a letter purportedly written by the French novelist, playwright, poet, and sometime political prisoner, Jean Genet. That's what the letter said.
Letter from Jean. When you live with friends in intimacy, in both literal and figurative nudity, and with a real try for directness of feeling, when you have shared jobs and goals with them that help keep you all focused on the same target and moving together in a common rhythm, when the many weirdnesses and idiosyncrasies of you come floating to the surface in an everyday context, not just at work or during a planned meeting, when all these different parts of oneself are explored by those around you because it affects them, because it affects the quality of our daily life, our work together, our sanity. Because they must be explored, because in reality our very lives may depend on having analysed and understood or even changed a way of behaving. We manifest our love this way, and I put love between quotations because it takes so many new and unexpected forms, and keeps showing our determination to be there and to continue together. When all this happens, the densest sort of bonds can be created, new and different ties between isolated individuals. They are born out of effort, striving, they happen. They can make you weak with wonder. A tissue of relationships that make you see many other more official, legal, sanctioned, inherited bonds seem fragile and arbitrary. Their law holds you together in their image. So when I think of my experience of these kind of rich relationships, and then I read about the history of revolutionary and resistance movements, I'm puzzled. It seems that in general, there's too much emphasis put on the role of ideas, on theory, principle, ideology, as the web that holds movements together and explains them. Have I misunderstood something? Does something happen in the process of writing? Is it words themselves? Of course, I don't mean ideas aren't important. Perhaps they are why we get together in the first place, the light that draws us there, rather than to a religious movement or any other number of possibilities. I'm not putting down thinking. Do I put down apples or breathing or the sky? And especially in resistance and revolutionary movements, where ideas, the life of ideas, and the exercise of thought in general has a freer and more dynamic play, a more critical role, than anywhere else within the dying and frightened society outside. No, I'm not putting it down. I'm only saying that the new bonds created among combatants, the loyal ties, the very new history they make together, all this goes a long way to explain a mystery. Why people put up with it. How they hang together through so much, even so much betrayal of the very principles that are said to motivate them. People put themselves into a meat grinder, a washing machine, a roller coaster. People try to turn themselves inside out. They go off knowing, even if only in their deepest hearts, that definitions of success are uncertain, ever-changing, and probably not measurable within their lifetime. For an idea, sure, and day to day? Joel and I have read and reread that PDF many, many times, and each time we find in it something so integral to the ideas of friendship that we talk about in this book. Striving, love, combat, rhythm, a very new kind of history that we talk quite a bit about this idea of history. The resonances abound. It was this PDF that became a key point of discussion between us and bonding between us when we first started to work on what would become this book. But the story of Genet's letter is still a bit of a mystery. We're not even sure that he actually wrote it, despite lots of digging. Sometimes, though, a tissue of relationships can include obscure PDFs, a reaching back to claim friendship with threads of history and struggle that may otherwise have been lost. Genet's vision of mutual striving, as well as the way in which we came to inhabit, is foundational to this book, and to one of the orientating concepts that we use throughout it, dense bonds. For when Genet talks about the densest sort of bonds, he captures something many of us have experienced, if not always managed to put into words. Maybe shared a thermos on the picket line, walked that friend to a dreaded appointment, or experienced one of the innumerable other shared everyday confrontations with the meat grinder of capitalism. Such interactions are animated by, but also illuminate injustice in our action against it. Through dense bonds, we become something different together. How do we have time? We've got a bit of time, right? Just checking. Well, we started doing this classic, ask each other one really easy question to give each other some more time to chat. I don't know if you wanted to say a bit more about the spy cops or about some of the ambient friendships.
It'd be really nice to open out. That's from the start. For people who arrived after my little meandering intro, please feel free to wander around, make yourself comfortable, do anything you need. And also, yeah, the kind of sincere commitment to the politics of friendship is also met by this kind of deep sense of how difficult it is to form and understand friendship when it's shaped by the kind of capitalist system that we live under. So that's the kind of tension in the book. I guess one way that comes out is towards the end when we write about the spy cop scandal, which, I mean, for those who followed it, you know, it's a brutal kind of story of how the state has used undercover policing to completely undermine kind of every part of left-wing political organising for the last 50 years. It's quite remarkable to try and maybe consider how different left-wing politics would have looked without this. Like, if we can imagine that history differently, and the real erosions to trust and our ability to organise that this hyper-policing is kind of just embedded, really. There's been a lot of focus, understandably and very importantly, on particularly women who were coerced into sexual and romantic relationships with undercover police. But we talk in this lecture at the end about how also there was a lot of people who had friendships with people who were undercover cops, and that's also horrendous. So I'll just read a tiny bit, actually. And I guess it's on our minds. We've been writing. Well, I've been writing a bit. We're just discussing a lot about the kind of policing of Palestine protests in Scotland over the last 2 years, which is Scalp, Scottish Activist Legal Project, which everyone should check out if you haven't already. Are in the process of kind of writing a report about that, which is going to be really important. We've all seen the kind of prescriptions and the changes that have been happening recently, which are a dramatic escalation of something that's also been going on for a long time, particularly for racialised people in terms of terror law being used across the country, but it creates kind of complicated problems as well. And I think it would be interesting to talk about that in terms of how we organise, in terms of the way that terror law is now much more in Scotland, and that is something that is created and therefore sort of in some sense accountable to Westminster rather than some of the other protest laws that aren't. So yeah, there's kind of tensions there. Anyway, in terms of the other thing being that the spy cop scandal doesn't extend to Scotland, and there was an attempt to get it to, but it was rejected. So this is kind of, there's a lot of work to be done here around kind of holding the police accountable. How that relates to friendship, I guess I'll just read this bit from Power and Paralysis, is the little section. It's only thanks to the tireless campaigning of groups like Police Spies Out of Our Lives, formed by women who were, in their own words, deceived into intimate sexual relationships with undercover officers, the Undercover Research Group and spycops.info, which everyone should check out, that the practices and scale of undercover policing have been unearthed. Naomi, one of the 5 women involved in the former group, who went on to write Deep Deception, the story of the spy cop network by the women who uncovered the shocking truth, which is a really powerful book, makes it clear how integral coercive friendships were to undercover officers. Many, many people had been close friends with Mark, this is her words, as this is Mark Kennedy alias Mark Stone, who was a notorious undercover cop. So while discussing the relationships he had, we mustn't forget the friendships these officers also betrayed. When I first met Mark, I thought we had many friends in common. It would be over a decade before I learned that his understanding of that community and these friendships and connections was prior knowledge gained from other undercover cops spying on social justice networks. Simply spying for the sake of spying, to infiltrate our lives, to observe us. The extent to which he would betray every one of these friendships was completely undreamt of. It seems impossible to imagine that betrayal now, to go back to a time before that knowledge seeped into my bones, but it really never ever occurred to me that Mark Stone was anything other than my friend. So we spent a bit of time talking about Tom Fowler, who is a South Wales anarchist who helps run spycops.info and speaks a lot about his experiences of a coercive undercover friendship. I guess our broader point here as well is that in some ways the state doesn't account for friendship in legal terms. You know, it's like you can't get a friendship visa. LinkedIn Arona writes about this. You can't. We've had examples where friends were refused couples counselling as friends because it's just for couples. You know, there's a certain like hierarchy, right, in terms of romantic and sexual relationships. We know this. But it also does definitely understand friendship as somehow political and something that can be quite powerful when we look at this example of undercover policing. I guess, like, to finish, I think the other reason I thought, we just decided it was important to include this was there's something really, really powerful about the way these women and the wider group that they're part of were able to rebuild bonds of trust and start politically organising again after going through, like, just completely unimaginable shit, right? And I think that kind of in a sort of roundabout way, the way they did that was through an understanding of the power of friendship. And I'll just finish this little bit and ask Laura a question, and then we'll open up with Lisa, who also wrote In Deep Perception about Mark Stone. So this is how we finish that chapter, and I think it's a really powerful kind of explanation of that. So November 2010, this is an email she writes to Mark and reproduces in the book. I'm not sure I can begin to know what to say. A bomb has exploded in my life, blowing it apart and also affecting dozens and dozens of amazing people who considered you a friend. Quite frankly, I'm still numb with shock. I'm afraid there's no fairy tale ending to this story. You might have thought you were living life in a film script, being the exciting double agent, but I'm sorry you don't get to run off with the girl in the end. I'm being shown such a huge amount of fiercely true love from so many incredible people I can't let down. I choose them. There's a really powerful kind of something for us to think about in terms of how we don't let this erosion of trust seep into our political organising and what that means. It'd be interesting to discuss that. I think the fact that being able to do that and organise this ongoing campaign around the inquiry into undercover policing, which again doesn't include Scotland, which is shameful, is really inspiring. I feel like maybe, do you want to say, because that's quite a lot, so do you want to say some words about history and why we decided to essentially write a history book? I mean, obviously you're a historian, so, but what is it about thinking through friendship and thinking about friendship as a historic tool that is useful to think about?
Thanks, John. Good question. Yeah. No, actually, on Spy Cops being part of what we tried to show in the book is there is this long history, obviously, and to historicise that a little bit and to think about how the state and its various kind of branches of policing have always been very, very interested in bonds of intimacy, because of course that is both as a means to undermine certain movements, but also as a way of trying to understand what is happening in terms of organising. And to do that is looking at friendship. So again, like historicising this, the importance of friendships, both in the way in which political activity can happen, but also that is understood by the state, and so these forms of betrayal are as much a part of the history of the left as we know as, stories of wonderful friendships. So partly in the book, I mean, as Jean Genet said in that opening letter, I'm a historian, so investigating various forms of kind of political activism in the 19th century, and constantly thinking like, but this, I feel like I'm not getting the full story. How might we look to the sort of more informal, kind of ephemeral worlds of like what was said at the, or who was friends with who, and often this might happen through letters and correspondence, and this is how movements were built, particularly at a time when, technologies of letter writing is the really cutting edge way in which people are creating transnational movements. So in one obvious way, the book is trying to think about how we might look to use friendship as an organising principle through which to find histories of struggle. But then in doing so, we also even further, I suppose, started thinking about friendships themselves as kind of the archives of all the sort of informal and irreplicable sort of sensibilities and affects that create political subjectivities. And how researching those things is also a way in which we develop our political subjectivities, to look to the past and think through the interior and interpersonal worlds of people in the past. So I guess in the chapter we have about intergenerational friendship, we sort of open that up even to think of history itself as a kind of intergenerational friendship. So a way of thinking and talking with the dead, with people in the past, in order to think collectively through modern problems. And, you know, historians, you know, we're kind of encouraged not to think like that necessarily. Maybe it's too sentimental or too sort of, we shouldn't be getting too close to our subjects. But I think that's bullshit, really. And I think actually it's so human to want to understand history. And part of that is about affect. It's about feeling connected to people in the past, right now, and future people. And so the book, I guess, is an attempt for us to, not in a sort of linear way, but to think through what a conversation about friendship between like us, people who we don't know or haven't read it yet or don't exist yet, and people of the past, and how might we weave things together and think about friendship as a kind of organising principle for doing history and for doing types of politics. So yeah, that kind of runs through the book in a way that probably, I mean, this is certainly not referable or, you know, historically, you know, the Academy probably don't count it as history, but for me this is the most important way of thinking through history, I think. So yeah, great. I guess as you've seen, there's quite a lot in the book that is sort of disparate, but we hope it kind of ties together. And I think for us it came quite organically because we were talking about this stuff, and it's such a beautiful and generative topic. And then we found that when talking to the people about it, because there's so much that feels really intensely important to people, and also it's like really quite hard and fraught and like difficult. So yeah, the book is a kind of a bit of a mad ride through some of the ways we've thought about it. We've already kind of thought, oh, there's loads of other things we could have thought about, and that's partly because we've had great interventions from people. So I guess we should just open it out and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts or anything to share, basically. Yeah. A good question. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, good point. The question was about what sort of sources we use, thinking about using textual historic sources or oral histories, and if so, what kind of people did we talk to? I guess, yeah. Well, so we didn't. Joel is by training, I guess, an anthropologist. Started writing about unity and kind of migrant political activism, thinking about friendship within that before we met, and I've been writing about histories of friendship. And so when we came together to write, we didn't do any sort of fresh interviews really for this book. We both drew on our, so for me it would be looking to historical, a lot of letters, also trying to even speculate as to what was said between activists by mapping out where people met and thinking about different social spaces and pubs that are important. And for Joel, you've worked obviously with quite a lot of people doing interviews, current living people within the immigration detention system, right?
Yeah, yes, that's it. Yeah, I did a PhD about friendship and care in, amongst movements organising against immigration detention in Scotland. A long time ago now, it's probably really out of date. Ironically, I didn't, when I finished doing the research in like 2016, but I interviewed a lot of people for that, and I was in those groups. I didn't actually do anything on Unity. I had this very strict rule where I didn't, I'm now reading it out for slightly uncomfortable because somehow I'm looking at people involved in Unity. But I was very clear that I've been doing that for a long time, and I didn't want to just like extract data from this thing that's like this inspiring No Borders organisation, sadly now ended in 2024. It ended Unity. But yeah, so I didn't do any research at Unity, but I did interview a lot of people who were adjacent to it, including that interview comes from the PhD, that one I started with. Yeah, but I did ethnography with groups who visit detention. There's one detention centre in Scotland, people probably know, called Dungavel, which is still open despite our attempts to shut it down for a long time. But yeah, thanks for the question. Does anyone else want to ask anything or make? I mean, I know we sort of, to follow Laura, we've been in a lot of bad, we've all been in bad Q&As in the past, but the ones on this topic have been so nice, and like, it's nice to remember we can do this, and that's kind of part of the point of like the letter writing and having conversations like this. It's important, right? But I feel like you were about to ask me. Yeah, please. I think I repeat it as well.
It's not so much a question, but I just want to share about friendship because I come from India and I have lots of women friends, and I think I'm really looking forward to this book. My year, and it was a complete surprise.
Happy birthday! Oh, that's so sweet. Thanks.
Yeah, but what I just wanted to say is that often as I was growing up and I joined college, I would hear my family always telling me that, yeah, friends is fine, but later on you'll move on in life and they won't be in your life later on. So I think it's the act of holding on to friendship and slowly seeing them grow. It has itself been a radical choice in life. It's not like giving up on family, but at the same time, I have drawn so much strength from the journey that my friends, and it has instilled so much strength in me as women to be able to be. I don't know, just the kind of trust I have in them that no matter where I am, what I'm doing, whatever I'm stuck in, I'll always have their back, and it's so heartening to see each of us grow through that point. So thank you for this book. Can't wait to read it. It just sounds amazing. As a question, it was very funny when I read the family abolition thing. I was really love to hear your thoughts on it, your experience, how did you come about writing about it, and why that segment is so important.
Thanks so much. I'm not going to be able to summarise that it's a very beautiful comment about how friendship can be really hard and families often advise us that they won't last, but to put effort and time, particularly into friendship amongst women, can be this incredibly powerful thing, and that you both came as friends today. We both became friends writing this book, so there's nice stories of that happening, and that's really beautiful. So thanks for doing that. And then the question, I guess, that followed that was about how family abolition and the politics of that inform the books. I'll try and just do a kind of short answer. I guess there's a whole chapter on that. For people who are new to that body of work, there's a lot of amazing writers that we cite, including Sophie Lewis, Emily O'Brien, Tiffany King, who write about basically the question of how, sort of what you described really, the politics of the family is used to kind of control and mould people's lives, and family abolition is it's basically the nuclear cell of capital, right? It's where we learn. I could maybe try and read a bit of it, but maybe it's nicer to just try and answer it. It's basically kind of where we learn to operate under the capitalist system, and I think to kind of think about really overhauling and having a revolutionary change away from that, we need to think about dismantling the way that kind of families instill this idea of kind of ownership, like husbands on wives, parents on children, of kind of scarcity, that there's a limit to love and to care, and you have to contain it within this little unit, and if you don't get that, you're fucked, kind of, right? And various other ways that the family cell kind of reproduces the system we're under. Obviously a lot of feminist writers over the years have written about that in terms of social reproduction. I guess we kind of try to intervene slightly into those debates, which also, to be clear, have a lot to say around particularly the kind of erosion of different forms of kinship under colonialism, under settler colonialism, specifically, say, in the genocide of indigenous peoples, and slavery, in the way that forms of kin making that didn't fit the normative kind of nuclear white Western family were obviously very violently erased by the system we live under, and that continues. And I think, so I guess our intervention then is to, what does friendship do in that? If we understand the family to be reproducing in the system we live under in lots of important ways, friendship often does too. Particularly kind of elite forms of friendship amongst very privileged groups. They work to kind of reinforce the family. The friends are just where you go to kind of let off steam about family, and then you come back to your nuclear unit, and there's not any kind of radical challenge to either of those things. They're actually they support the family, and particularly, and exclude people who aren't part of that in various ways. There's also this kind of idea that we talk a lot about the brunch friend, which is a phrase that we borrowed via Francis Ha, the film from Anna Heath Beirut, who's a writer based in Edinburgh, whose book BFFs is a brilliant book about women's friendship, which I'd really recommend to you as well if you want to get for the next birthday. And we talk about how, yeah, there's this idea that she talks, that people meet maybe kind of once every couple of weeks and really kind of catch up in this really kind of intense, forced way. And we talk about how that often ends up being kind of blurring into networking as well, and you can start to feel a bit, or even connecting. It's like about just kind of checking in, and often like focused on family and reproducing that system. And as much as we like brunch, it's also just something expensive and not always available to lots of people. And the things that would be a much more open and available forms of sociality, say just hanging out for free in a nice shady park and talking about ideas, are very limited. And again, exclusionary in other ways, right? So it's kind of how do we try and think about building forms of sociality and friendship that don't reinforce the nuclear family and don't reinforce these quite normative scripts around friendship. I think that's probably what I'd say. I mean, yeah, I've garbled it a bit, but it is a bit more coherent in the chapter, I promise. Do you want to add anything? Yeah.
Joel wrote the book really well, so I want to remind you of it, is that, we agree really with that body of work. The abolitionist work is really brilliant, but a lot of it, I guess where like Emmy O'Brien, for example, would suggest that capitalism is so totalizing that there's no such thing as kind of family or forms of those kinds of sociality within capitalism. And we're kind of like, well, yeah, but like maybe we can leave something out, at the edges, and that actually, we don't have to throw out family entirely, but if we reject some of the scripts that we have both about nuclear family and about friendship, then we might think about friendship or the forms of sociality that can operate across the amount of biological, non-biological, it doesn't matter. Like the point is more about in the making of it between people, like what does that kind of friendship look like between people, and that might be someone who happens to be a member of your kind of blood relation, but it might not be. But we're sort of suggesting that maybe a way of thinking through abolition is to say that shouldn't matter, and that what matters is the way in which you seek and create and sustain forms of friendship, I guess.
It's time, I think, yeah.
I was just going to say that because we're out here and we're not in the shop, we actually don't need to leave immediately. So if you want to, if we kind of finish the official bit with the microphones, and we give our speakers a hand of applause in a moment, they will move over to this table maybe, or a table that's more in the shade, to do signings. If you want to get the books are just behind you, and I'll be there to sell them to you if you would like one. But yeah, feel free to stick around for a little bit and chat to each other and chat to the speakers if you didn't get a chance to bring in your questions or comments. But yeah, please join me in thanking our lovely speakers.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we can hang out for a while. We might go to the pub as well.